The iron shackles around Zelda Zimmerman's wrists felt heavier than the August sun beating down on the dusty platform where she stood, her chin raised despite the tears threatening to spill from her emerald eyes as men shouted numbers like she was nothing more than livestock at a cattle auction. Her stepmother Constance stood to the side with a satisfied smile playing across her thin lips, counting the money already in her mind while Zelda's father lay 6 feet under the hard California earth, dead barely 3 months from the fever that swept through Riverside in the spring of 1878. Constance had wasted no time after the funeral selling off everything her father had built, including his only daughter. The ranch hands had been dismissed, the cattle sold, and now Zelda was the final piece of property to be liquidated, standing on a makeshift platform in the scorching heat, while men she had never met appraised her like merchandise. $50 called out a thick-set man with tobacco-stained teeth and greasy hair slicked back under a worn hat. His eyes roamed over Zelda in a way that made her skin crawl, and she looked away quickly, focusing instead on the distant mountains that rose beyond the town limits. 60, countered another voice, this one belonging to a rail, thin man with spectacles and nervous hands that twitched at his sides. Zelda had seen him before, running the general store where her father used to buy supplies. The man had always looked at her with an intensity that frightened her, watching her through the windows whenever she passed by on the street. The auctioneer, a portly man named Silas Crane, who served as both the town's unofficial broker of unsavory deals and the owner of the largest saloon in Riverside, rubbed his hands together with obvious glee. $60, do I hear 70? This is a fine young woman, gentlemen, healthy and strong, raised proper by her late father, God rest his soul. She can cook, clean, and handle herself around a ranch. Do I hear 70? Zelda wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but the shackles held her in place, and Constance had made it abundantly clear what would happen if she tried to resist. The law in Riverside was thin and corrupt, and a stepmother selling off her wayward stepdaughter to pay supposed debts was hardly the worst thing that happened in this dusty corner of California. The sheriff had looked the other way when Constance filed the papers, claiming Zelda owed money for room and board since her father's death. A lie so transparent it should have been laughable, except nobody was laughing. $70, the thick-set man called out again, his grin widening, and I will put her to good use in my establishment up north. Zelda's stomach turned. She knew what kind of establishment he meant. The brothels that lined the mining towns were always looking for fresh faces, and girls who ended up there rarely escaped. Some died young from disease or violence, others simply faded away into hollow-eyed shadows of themselves. Her father would have killed any man who suggested such a fate for his daughter, but he was gone, and she was alone. 80, the store owner squeaked, his voice cracking with nervousness and something darker. The thick-set man scowled but nodded. 90. $100? The new voice cut through the heated afternoon air like a knife through butter, deep and steady and completely calm. Every head turned to see who had spoken, including Zelda's. A tall man stood at the edge of the small crowd that had gathered to watch the auction, his broad-brimmed hat pulled low over his face but not low enough to hide the strong jaw and the piercing blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore dusty trail clothes and a gun belt that sat comfortably on his hips like it belonged there, and when he stepped forward into the sunlight, Zelda could see he was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. Silas Crane's eyebrows shot up. $100 is the bid. Do I hear 110? The thick-set man studied the newcomer with obvious displeasure, taking in the gun, the stance, the quiet confidence that radiated from the stranger like heat from a campfire. Whatever he saw made him think twice about continuing because he shook his head and spat into the dust. Too rich for my blood. She better be worth it, Cowboy. The store owner looked like he might cry, but he too remained silent, his nervous hands now wringing together in frustration. $100 going once, Silas called out, his voice rising with theatrical flair. Going twice, sold to the gentleman in the black hat for $100. The stranger stepped up onto the platform and pulled a worn leather wallet from his coat, counting out bills with practiced ease while Zelda watched with a mixture of fear and desperate hope warring in her chest. Up close, she could see his eyes were the color of the sky just before sunset, that deep blue that seemed endless, and there was something in them that made her think perhaps not all men were monsters, but then again, he had just bought her like property, so what kind of man did that make him? He handed the money to Silas without a word and then turned to Zelda, studying her face for a long moment. "Do you have belongings?" His voice was gentler than she expected, and she found herself nodding. "A bag at my stepmother's house." He turned to where Constance stood, counting her money with greedy fingers. "Where is her bag?" Constance looked up with irritation. "At the house on Cedar Street, the one with the blue door. But that will cost extra." "No, it will not," the stranger said quietly, and something in his tone made Constance take a step back. "That is her property, and you have already been paid for what you were selling. Where are the keys to these shackles?" Silas produced a small key from his vest pocket, and the stranger took it without thanks, then knelt down and unlocked the iron cuffs from Zelda's wrists. The metal fell away, and she rubbed at the raw skin underneath, feeling the blood rush back into her hands with tingling relief. "Can you ride?" the stranger asked. "Yes," Zelda said softly. Her father had taught her to ride almost before she could walk, and she had spent countless hours on horseback helping him manage the ranch. "Good. My horse can carry us both to get your things, and then we will leave this town." He jumped down from the platform and held up his hands to help her down. Zelda hesitated only a moment before placing her hands in his, letting him lift her easily to the ground. His hands were warm and calloused from hard work, and he released her as soon as her feet touched the dirt, respecting her space, in a way that made some of the fear in her chest loosen just slightly. A magnificent chestnut stallion waited at the hitching post, and the stranger untied the reins with quick, efficient movements. He swung up into the saddle and then offered his hand to Zelda again. She took it and let him pull her up behind him, settling onto the horse's broad back and trying to figure out where to put her hands. "Hold on to me," he said matter-of-factly. "We will not go far, but I do not want you to fall." Zelda wrapped her arms tentatively around his waist, feeling the solid muscle beneath his shirt and the steady rhythm of his breathing. He clicked his tongue, and the horse moved forward at an easy walk, carrying them down the dusty main street of Riverside while curious eyes watched from windows and doorways. News of the auction would spread quickly, and by nightfall everyone in town would know that Constance Zimmerman had sold her stepdaughter and some mysterious cowboy had been the buyer. The house on Cedar Street looked smaller and more dilapidated than Zelda remembered, though in truth it had only been 2 days since Constance had dragged her away to Silas Crane's saloon and locked her in a back room until the auction could be arranged. Those 2 days had felt like an eternity, spent wondering what kind of man would buy her and what he would do once she belonged to him legally. The stranger dismounted and helped Zelda down, then followed her up the sagging porch steps. The blue door was unlocked, and they stepped into the dim interior where dust motes danced in the strips of sunlight that filtered through the yellowed curtains. Zelda's bag sat exactly where she had left it, a worn carpet bag that held everything she owned in the world now. 2 dresses, a shawl her mother had knitted before she died when Zelda was 8, a silver locket with her parents' wedding portrait inside, and the leather-bound journal her father had given her for her 18th birthday just last year. She picked up the bag and turned to find the stranger watching her with those unnervingly blue eyes. "Is that everything?" "Yes," Zelda said. "I do not have much." He nodded and gestured toward the door. "Then let us go." They rode out of Riverside as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The stranger kept the horse at a steady trot, following the road north for a while before turning off onto a narrow trail that wound up into the foothills. Zelda held on and said nothing, her mind racing with questions she did not quite know how to ask. Who was this man? Where was he taking her? What did he expect from her now that he had paid good money for her like she was a horse or a piece of furniture? They rode for nearly 2 hours as the light faded, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Finally, the stranger guided the horse off the trail into a small clearing surrounded by oak trees, where a creek burbled softly over smooth stones. He dismounted and helped Zelda down, then began unsaddling his horse with efficient movements. "We will camp here tonight," he said. "Tomorrow we will continue north to my ranch. It is about a day's ride from here." Zelda stood awkwardly, still clutching her carpetbag. "What is your name?" He looked up from loosening the cinch on his saddle. "Xander Thorne." "I am Zelda Zimmerman, but I suppose you already know that." Xander nodded and lifted the saddle from his horse's back, setting it carefully on a fallen log. "I know your name. I also know your father was Thomas Zimmerman, and he was a good man. I worked for him 5 years ago when I first came to California, helping with a cattle drive from his ranch up to the stockyards in Sacramento. He spoke of you often and with great love." Zelda felt tears prick her eyes at the mention of her father. "You knew him?" "I did. He taught me a lot about ranching in this part of the country, and he paid fair wages when a lot of men did not. When I heard what your stepmother was planning, I rode straight through from my ranch in the North Valley to make sure you did not end up in the hands of men like the ones bidding today." "So you bought me to help me?" Zelda asked, trying to understand. "Not because you want a wife or a servant or something worse?" Xander met her eyes directly. "I bought you because it was the only way to get you away from that auction legally. But you are not my property, Zelda. You are a free woman. When we get to my ranch tomorrow, I will give you your freedom papers, properly witnessed and filed. You can stay and work for fair wages if you choose, or you can take the horse I will give you and ride wherever you want to go. The choice will be yours." Zelda stared at him in disbelief. "Why would you do that? You just spent $100. "Because it was the right thing to do," Xander said simply. He turned back to his horse and began rubbing the animal down with a cloth from his saddlebag. "And because I made a promise to your father once that if he ever needed help, I would give it. He is gone, but the promise still stands. You are his daughter, and you deserve better than what was happening in the town." For the first time since her father's death, Zelda felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of fear and despair that had been wound so tight she had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without its weight. She set down her bag and moved closer to where Xander worked. "Can I help?" He glanced at her and something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Do you know how to build a fire?" "My father taught me." "Good. There is dry wood over by those trees. I will take care of the horse, and then we can make camp properly." They worked together in comfortable silence as full darkness fell and the stars emerged in their thousands overhead. Zelda gathered wood and built a small fire ring with stones from the creek, arranging kindling in larger pieces in the way her father had shown her years ago. Xander finished with the horse and produced a flint from his saddlebag, striking sparks into the kindling until it caught and began to burn. Soon they had a cheerful fire crackling between them, pushing back the darkness and the chill that came with the desert night. Xander pulled out supplies from his pack and began preparing a simple meal of beans and salt pork, along with some cornbread wrapped in cloth. They ate sitting on opposite sides of the fire, the silence between them no longer awkward, but rather peaceful. Zelda found herself studying him when she thought he was not looking, taking in the strong profile and the way his hands moved with such certainty and skill. He was handsome in a rough way, she decided, and there was something inherently trustworthy about him that made her want to believe his words about freedom and choice. "Where is your ranch?" she asked finally, breaking the silence. "About 40 miles north of here, in a valley between 2 ridges. Good grazing land and water from a spring that never runs dry. I have been building it up for 3 years now, running cattle and breaking horses. It is not much yet, but it is mine, bought and paid for with honest work." "Do you have help? Ranch hands?" "2 men who work for me. Good men, both older and respectful. They will not bother you if you decide to stay. I will make sure of that. Zelda nodded and poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks spiral up into the night. I do not know what I want to do yet. I have no family except my stepmother, and she made it clear I am not welcome. My father's ranch is gone, sold to pay debts that probably did not even exist. Everything I knew is gone. Then maybe this is a chance to build something new, Xander said quietly. I know what it is like to lose everything and have to start over. It is hard, but it is possible if you have the will for it. What did you lose? He was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. My family, back in Texas. Comanche raid when I was 16. I was out checking the fence line when it happened. By the time I got back to the house, everyone was dead. My parents, my 2 younger sisters, even the dog. I buried them, and then I rode west because I could not stand to stay in that place anymore. Zelda felt her throat tighten with shared grief. I am so sorry. Xander shrugged, but she could see the old pain in his eyes. It was 10 years ago. The hurt does not go away, but you learn to carry it differently. Your father helped me when I first came to California, gave me work when I had nothing, and taught me that not everyone in the world was cruel or violent. I owe him more than I can ever repay, so helping you is the least I can do. They sat in silence after that, each lost in their own memories and thoughts. Eventually, Xander stood and pulled a bedroll from his pack, spreading it out on the ground near the fire. You should sleep. We have a long ride tomorrow, and it will be hot once the sun is up. What about you? I will take the first watch and sleep later. Old habit from trail driving. I do not sleep easy when I'm camping anyway. Zelda wanted to protest, but exhaustion was pulling at her bones, the events of the last 2 days finally catching up with her. She retrieved her shawl from her carpet bag and wrapped it around her shoulders, then lay down on the bedroll Xander had prepared. The ground was hard, but the blanket was clean, and the fire was warm. And within minutes, she felt herself drifting towards sleep. Xander, she murmured, half asleep already. Yes? Thank you for what you did today, for giving me a choice. You're welcome, Zelda. Sleep now. She closed her eyes and let the darkness take her, feeling safer than she had in months with this stranger standing guard over her sleep. The sun was already climbing the sky when Zelda woke to the smell of coffee brewing over the rekindled fire. She sat up slowly, momentarily disoriented before remembering where she was and how she had gotten here. Xander was crouched by the fire, pouring dark liquid from a battered tin coffee pot into 2 tin cups. He looked up when he heard her move and nodded in greeting. Morning. I hope you like your coffee strong because that's the only way I know how to make it. Zelda stood and folded the bedroll, her muscles stiff from sleeping on the ground. Strong is fine. My father drank his coffee strong enough to strip paint. Xander handed her a cup, and their fingers brushed briefly in the exchange. Zelda felt a strange flutter in her stomach at the contact and quickly looked away, focusing on the coffee instead. It was indeed strong and bitter, but also hot and reviving, exactly what she needed. They broke camp efficiently, working together to pack up supplies and saddle Xander's horse. The sun was fully up now, and already the day was growing warm, promising another scorching afternoon. Xander helped Zelda mount and then swung up behind her this time, his arms coming around her to grip the reins. She found herself hyper-aware of his presence, the solid warmth of his chest against her back, and the way his breath stirred the loose strands of her dark hair. They rode north through rolling hills covered in dry golden grass and scattered oak trees, following trails that Xander seemed to know by heart. He pointed out landmarks as they went, a distinctive rock formation here, a lightning-struck tree there, teaching her the lay of the land without being asked. Zelda listened and watched, filing away the information instinctively. If she was going to make a life out here, she needed to know the territory. They stopped at midday to rest the horse and eat a cold lunch of jerky and hardtack. Zelda sat in the shade of a large boulder while Xander checked the horse's hooves and gave the animal water from his hat. She studied him openly now in the bright daylight, noticing details she had missed the night before. The way his hair curled slightly where it brushed his collar, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the laugh lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more than he frowned despite the hardships he had faced. "What are you thinking about?" Xander asked, catching her staring. Zelda felt her cheeks flush, but she met his eyes steadily. "I was thinking that you are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I do not know. Someone older, maybe, or harder. Someone who looked like the kind of man who would buy a woman at an auction." Xander's expression darkened slightly. "I understand why you would think that, but I promise you my intentions are honest. You will see when we get to the ranch." They rode on through the afternoon heat, climbing higher into the foothills where the air grew slightly cooler and pine trees began to appear among the oaks. Zelda dozed against Xander's back as the horse's steady rhythm lulled her into a half-sleep, and when she jerked awake sometime later, the sun was beginning its descent, and they were riding through a narrow pass between two rocky ridges. "Almost there," Xander said, his voice warm near her ear. "Another mile or so." They emerged from the pass into a valley that took Zelda's breath away. Green grass carpeted the valley floor, fed by a silver stream that wound through the center like a ribbon. Cattle grazed in scattered groups, their red and white hides bright against the grass. A cabin stood near the stream, built from solid logs with a stone chimney rising from one end and a wide porch wrapping around the front. Beyond the cabin, she could see a barn and several corrals, along with a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. "This is yours?" Zelda breathed. "Mine," Xander confirmed, and she could hear the pride in his voice. "And 3 years of work, and it is finally starting to look like a real ranch." As they rode down into the valley, 2 men emerged from the barn and stood watching their approach. One was older with gray in his beard and a weathered face that spoke of decades spent outdoors. The other was younger, perhaps in his 40s, with broad shoulders and a kind expression. Both men looked curious but not hostile as Xander reined in the horse near the cabin. "Charlie, Pete, this is Zelda Zimmerman," Xander said as he dismounted and helped Zelda down. "She will be staying with us for a while. I expect you both to treat her with respect and keep your distance unless she asks for help. Is that understood?" The older man, Charlie, nodded slowly. "Understood, boss, madam." He touched the brim of his hat in greeting. Pete did the same. "Madam, welcome to the ranch." "Thank you," Zelda said softly, clutching her carpet bag against her chest like a shield. Xander put a hand lightly on her elbow and guided her toward the cabin. "Come on, I will show you where you can stay, and then we can talk about what happens next." The cabin's interior was sparse but clean, with a large main room that served as kitchen and living area, a separate bedroom off to one side, and a sleeping loft accessible by a ladder. Xander gestured around with an apologetic expression. "It is not much, but it is solid, and it keeps out the rain and the cold. You can have the bedroom. I usually sleep in the loft anyway." "I cannot take your bed," Zelda protested. "You can and you will, I insist." His tone was firm but not unkind. "Make yourself comfortable. I need to go talk to Charlie and Pete about the stock, but I will be back in an hour or so and we can have supper. Can you cook?" "Yes, my father taught me. What do you have?" "Pantry is over there. Take whatever you need. I am not picky." He left, closing the door softly behind him, and Zelda was alone for the first time since the auction. She set down her bag and explored the cabin slowly, running her fingers over the rough-hewn table, the stone fireplace, the shelves lined with canned goods and supplies. The bedroom was small but comfortable, with a real bed frame and a mattress stuffed with what smelled like fresh straw and herbs to keep away insects. A small window looked out over the valley, and Zelda stood there for a long moment watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors as it set behind the western ridge. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses on pegs driven into the wall and setting her mother's shawl carefully on the bed. The locket went around her neck where it belonged, the cool silver resting against her skin like a talisman. Then she went to investigate the pantry and see what she could make for supper. By the time Xander returned, she had a pot of stew bubbling over the fire and fresh biscuits baking in the cast-iron Dutch oven. He stopped in the doorway and stared, then shook his head with something that might have been wonder. "It has been a long time since this place smelled like a real home." "I hope you like stew. I found potatoes and carrots and some salted beef." "I like anything I do not have to cook myself," Xander said honestly. He washed his hands in the basin by the door and then sat down at the table. "Charlie and Pete were surprised when I explained the situation, but they are good men. They will respect your privacy." Zelda ladled stew into bowls and brought them to the table along with the biscuits, which had turned out golden and perfect. They ate in silence for a few minutes, both hungry from the long day of travel. Finally, Xander pushed back his empty bowl and fixed Zelda with a serious look. "I meant what I said yesterday. You are free to leave whenever you want. But if you choose to stay, I can offer you work and fair wages. I need someone to help manage the household and do the cooking for the ranch hands. Charlie is getting too old to do both ranch work and cooking, and Pete is hopeless in a kitchen. I can pay you $10 a month plus room and board. It is honest work, and you will be safe here. I give you my word on that." Zelda considered his offer carefully. $10 a month was actually quite generous for household work, and the idea of having her own money for the first time in her life was appealing. More than that, though, she realized she did not want to leave. Something about this valley and this cabin and this quiet, honorable man made her feel like perhaps she had found a place where she could finally breathe again. "I will stay," she said quietly. "At least for now. I would like to work and earn my own way." Xander's face relaxed into a genuine smile, and Zelda felt her heart skip slightly at the sight. He was even more handsome when he smiled. "Good. I am glad. And Zelda, I want you to know that you are not a servant here. You are a member of this household equal to Charlie and Pete and myself. You eat at this table, not in the kitchen. You speak your mind when you have something to say. This is your home now for as long as you want it to be." "Thank you," Zelda whispered, feeling tears threaten again. "You have no idea what that means to me." "I think I do," Xander said gently. "I have been alone and desperate before. I remember what it feels like. Now let me help you clean up these dishes and then you should rest. Tomorrow we can get you settled properly and I will show you around the ranch." They worked together to clean the kitchen, moving around each other with surprising ease in the small space. When everything was put away, Xander bid her good night and climbed the ladder to the loft, leaving Zelda to retire to the bedroom. She changed into her nightdress and lay down in the real bed with its clean sheets and soft pillow, and for the first time in months, she felt the beginnings of peace settle over her like a blanket. The days turned into weeks, and Zelda settled into the rhythm of ranch life with surprising ease. She woke early each morning to start breakfast for the men, preparing hearty meals of bacon and eggs and biscuits that they devoured with genuine appreciation. After breakfast, she cleaned the cabin and did laundry in the big tub behind the house, hanging clothes to dry in the warm sun. Midday, she prepared lunch, usually something simple that could be eaten quickly, and in the afternoon she worked on mending clothes or tending the small vegetable garden that had been neglected before her arrival. She cooked supper each evening, experimenting with the supplies in the pantry and the fresh vegetables from the garden, and the four of them ate together at the table while Charlie and Pete told stories about their adventures on various ranches and cattle drives. Zelda found herself laughing at their tall tales and learning more about this harsh, beautiful land than she had ever known before. But it was the time she spent with Xander that she treasured most. He taught her to ride one of the gentler horses, a sweet-natured mare named Daisy, and they went on long rides through the valley and up into the surrounding hills. He showed her the boundaries of his property and pointed out the different plants and animals, teaching her which were useful and which were dangerous. He told her stories about his time in Texas and his journey west, and slowly, cautiously, Zelda began to share her own stories about growing up on her father's ranch and the pain of losing first her mother and then her father. She found herself watching him more and more, noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed and the gentleness with which he handled the horses. She noticed how he always made sure she had enough to eat before taking his own portion, and how he listened when she spoke as if her words actually mattered. Little gestures that seemed insignificant but added up to something that made her chest feel tight and her heart beat faster. One evening after supper, Charlie and Pete headed back to the bunkhouse, and Zelda found herself alone with Xander on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The night was warm and still, filled with the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. "Can I ask you something?" Zelda said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Of course. Why have you never married? You have a good ranch. You are young and kind and handsome. Surely women must have been interested." Xander was quiet for a moment, his profile outlined against the twilight. "I suppose I never found the right woman. And after what happened to my family, I was afraid to love anyone again, afraid that if I let someone close, I would lose them too. It is easier to be alone sometimes, or at least it feels that way." "I understand that," Zelda said. "I have been afraid too. Afraid that I would end up like my stepmother, bitter and cruel. Afraid that I would never find someone who saw me as more than property or a burden." Xander turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious in the dim light. "You are not a burden, Zelda. You are strong and capable, and you have survived things that would break most people. Do not ever let anyone make you feel less than you are." His words settled into her heart like seeds finding fertile soil, and she felt something shift inside her, some final wall crumbling away. "Can I tell you something true?" "Always." "I'm glad you bought me that day. I know that sounds strange, but I'm glad it was you and not someone else. These past weeks here have been the happiest I can remember in a long time. You make me feel safe and valued, and I have not felt that way since my father died." Xander's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers warm and strong as they laced through her own. "I am glad too, more than I can say. This place has felt more like a home since you came here. You bring light to it, Zelda. You bring life." They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped and hearts opening slowly to possibilities neither had dared to imagine before. Eventually the night grew cold, and they went inside, but something had changed between them, some unspoken understanding that this was the beginning of something precious and rare. Autumn came to the valley in shades of gold and crimson as the oak leaves turned and the air grew crisp with the promise of winter. Zelda had been at the ranch for 3 months now, and she could hardly remember what her life had been like before. The fear and desperation of the auction seemed like something from a distant nightmare, replaced by the simple satisfactions of honest work and good company. Her relationship with Xander had deepened gradually, built on shared meals and long conversations and the easy comfort of two people who understood each other's pain and healing. They still had not spoken directly about what was growing between them, but it was there in every glance and gesture, in the way their hands brushed when passing dishes at the table, and the way Xander's eyes followed her when she moved around the kitchen. One Saturday afternoon, when Charlie and Pete had ridden into the nearest town for supplies, Xander asked Zelda if she would like to ride up to the high meadow where he kept some of his best breeding stock. She agreed eagerly, always happy for a chance to ride and to spend time alone with him. They saddled Daisy and Xander's stallion and set out across the valley, climbing the winding trail that led up the eastern ridge. The high meadow was beautiful, a flat expanse of grass dotted with wildflowers even this late in the season. Several magnificent horses grazed peacefully, their coats gleaming in the afternoon sun. Xander pointed out the bloodlines and characteristics of each animal with obvious pride, and Zelda listened attentively, genuinely interested in his passion for breeding quality stock. They dismounted and let their horses graze while they sat on a flat rock overlooking the valley below. From this height, they could see the entire ranch spread out like a painting, the cabin and barn tiny in the distance, and the silver thread of the stream winding through the green grass. "It is beautiful," Zelda said softly. "You have built something wonderful here, Xander." "We have built something wonderful," he corrected gently. "You are as much a part of this ranch now as I am. It would not be the same without you." Zelda turned to look at him and found him already watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What are you saying?" Xander took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I am saying that I have fallen in love with you, Zelda Zimmerman. Somewhere between that auction and now, you became the most important person in my world. I know we have only known each other a few months, and I know the circumstances of how we met were terrible. But what I feel for you is real and true and deeper than anything I have ever known." Zelda's heart was hammering in her chest so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I started falling for you that first night when you told me I was free. But I was afraid to believe it could be real. Afraid that I was just grateful and confusing that with something else. But it is not gratitude, Xander. It is love. True, honest, terrifying love." Xander cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "I do not want to rush you or make you feel pressured. You have been through so much and you deserve time to heal and to figure out what you want from life, but I need you to know that I am here, and I'm not going anywhere. Whatever you need, whatever you want, I will give it to you if I can." "I want this," Zelda said firmly, covering his hands with her own. "I want you. I want a life here with you, building this ranch and making a home together. I want to wake up every morning knowing I am safe and loved. I want all of it, Xander, if you will have me." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Zelda felt the last pieces of her broken heart finally click back into place. They stayed on the ridge until the sun began to set, talking about the future and making plans. And when they finally rode back down to the cabin, they were holding hands and laughing like young people in love should laugh. That evening after supper, when Charlie and Pete had retired to the bunkhouse, Xander produced a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold ring set with a tiny diamond. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "The only thing I managed to save from the house before I left Texas. I have been carrying it with me for 10 years, waiting to find someone worthy of wearing it. Zelda, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner in all things?" Zelda could barely see through her tears, but she nodded vigorously. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Xander slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. They spent the rest of the evening sitting by the fire making plans, deciding to ride into town the following week to speak with the minister and arrange a simple ceremony. Zelda wanted something small and private, just the four of them and perhaps a few neighbors, and Xander agreed that suited him perfectly. They were married on a crisp October morning in the small church in Riverside, the same town where Zelda had been auctioned like property just 4 months earlier, but she was not returning as a victim or a piece of merchandise. She was returning as Zelda Thorne, a free woman marrying the man she loved by her own choice. Charlie and Pete served as witnesses, both men beaming with genuine happiness for the couple. Even the minister, who had heard the story of how they met, seemed moved by the transformation. Zelda wore her mother's shawl over her best dress, and Xander wore a new suit coat he had purchased in town. And when they spoke their vows, they meant every word with a depth of sincerity that came from truly understanding what they were promising each other. They promised to love and honor and cherish, to stand together through hardship and joy, to build a life founded on mutual respect and genuine partnership. After the ceremony, they had a simple celebration at the ranch with Charlie and Pete and a few neighboring ranchers who had become friends over the years. Someone brought a fiddle, and there was music and dancing under the stars, and Zelda laughed more than she had in years as Xander spun her around the yard in a clumsy approximation of a waltz. When everyone had finally gone home or retired to the bunkhouse, Xander carried Zelda over the threshold of the cabin like tradition dictated, and they spent their wedding night in the little bedroom that had become hers, now truly theirs together. He was gentle and patient, taking time to make sure she felt safe and cherished, and when they finally came together, it was with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless and complete. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. Winter came hard to the valley with snow piling high and temperatures dropping below freezing for weeks at a time. They lost several head of cattle to the cold despite their best efforts, and there were days when Zelda thought the wind howling around the cabin would drive her mad with its relentless noise. But they faced every challenge together, working as a team to keep the ranch running and the animals fed. Xander taught Zelda how to handle a rifle so she could help protect the stock from wolves and mountain lions, and she proved to be a natural shot with steady hands and a keen eye. She taught him how to preserve vegetables and meat so their stores would last through the long winter, and together they made sure Charlie and Pete were comfortable in the bunkhouse with enough firewood and warm blankets. Spring came finally in a rush of melting snow and new grass, and with it came new calves and new hopes. The ranch had survived its first winter under Zelda's care, and everyone agreed it was in better shape than it had ever been. Zelda's garden flourished under her attention, providing fresh vegetables through the summer and fall, and she learned how to make cheese and butter from the cow Xander bought specifically for that purpose. She also discovered she was pregnant, a revelation that came in the heat of July when she had been married just 9 months. The realization filled her with equal parts joy and terror, but Xander's reaction was pure delight. He was going to be a father, and the thought seemed to make him stand taller and smile wider than ever before. The pregnancy was not easy. Zelda suffered from sickness in the early months that left her weak and unable to keep much food down. Xander hired a woman from town to come help with the cooking and housework, refusing to let Zelda push herself too hard. Charlie and Pete treated her like fragile glass, constantly fussing and trying to help even when she insisted she was fine. But as the months passed and her belly grew round with their child, Zelda felt a deep contentment settle over her. This baby was the ultimate proof that she had not just survived but thrived, that the woman who had stood on that auction block in chains was gone forever, replaced by someone stronger and happier than she had ever dreamed possible. Their son was born on a frigid February morning in 1879, arriving after a long and difficult labor that left Zelda exhausted but triumphant. Xander was there through all of it, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, and when the baby finally emerged squalling and red-faced into the world, they both wept with joy. They named him Thomas after Zelda's father, and the baby thrived from his first breath. He had Xander's blue eyes and Zelda's dark hair, and from the very beginning he seemed to have his own strong personality. Charlie and Pete were utterly besotted with the child, taking turns holding him and making ridiculous faces to coax out his first smiles. Zelda had never known she could love anyone as much as she loved this tiny person she and Xander had created together. Every sleepless night and exhausting day was worth it to see Thomas grow and change, to watch Xander cradle his son with such infinite gentleness and wonder. They were a family now in the truest sense, bound together by love and choice and shared dreams for the future. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler to a sturdy little boy, the ranch continued to prosper. Xander's reputation for breeding quality horses spread throughout California, and buyers came from as far away as San Francisco to purchase his stock. The cattle herd grew larger and healthier each year, and Xander was able to hire additional hands to help with the increased work. Zelda managed the household with skill and efficiency, raising Thomas while also keeping the books for the ranch and managing the finances. She discovered she had a head for numbers and business, and Xander came to rely on her judgment in matters both large and small. They were true partners in every sense, making decisions together and supporting each other through successes and setbacks. When Thomas was 3 years old, Zelda became pregnant again, this time with a daughter they named Rose after Xander's mother. The birth was easier than the first, and baby Rose was a calm, happy child who seemed content to observe the world around her with solemn, dark eyes. Thomas was fascinated with his little sister, constantly wanting to help care for her and showing a protective streak that made both parents smile. The years rolled by in a blur of seasons and celebrations, of birthdays and holidays and quiet evenings by the fire. Charlie grew older and eventually retired from active ranch work, content to sit on the porch and whittle while watching Thomas and Rose play in the yard. Pete took over as foreman, managing the younger hands with fair authority and dry wit. 2 more children came in time, another son they named Samuel, and a second daughter called Elizabeth. The cabin was expanded to accommodate the growing family, with additional bedrooms added and a larger kitchen built to handle the constant activity of 4 energetic children. The ranch prospered beyond Xander's wildest dreams, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. But through all the growth and change, the bond between Xander and Zelda never wavered. If anything, it deepened with each passing year, seasoned by shared challenges and mutual respect. They still rode together when time allowed, escaping to the high meadow where Xander had first told her he loved her, and they still talked for hours about everything and nothing, the way they had in those early days when they were first learning each other's hearts. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they stood together on the porch of the cabin watching the sun set over the valley that had become their kingdom. 4 children played in the yard under Charlie's watchful eye, while Pete worked nearby repairing a saddle. The sound of laughter and life filled the air, so different from the silence that had once hung over this place. "Do you ever think about that day?" Zelda asked quietly, leaning into Xander's embrace. "The auction?" "Sometimes," Xander admitted, "but not with regret. Only with gratitude that I was there when you needed someone, and that you gave me the chance to prove I was worth trusting." "You saved my life that day," Zelda said, "in every way that matters." "No," Xander said gently, turning her to face him. "We saved each other. You brought life and love and purpose to this ranch and to me." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of the love that had sustained them through a decade of marriage and would continue to sustain them for all the decades to come. Their children called to them from the yard, and they went down hand in hand to join the noisy chaos, grateful for every moment of the beautiful life they had built together. Thomas grew into a fine young man who inherited his father's skill with horses and his mother's head for business. He took over more and more of the ranch operations as Xander aged, eventually marrying a school teacher from town and building his own house on the far side of the valley. Rose became a talented artist whose paintings of the California landscape gained recognition throughout the state, though she chose to remain on the ranch where her heart belonged. Samuel followed his dream of becoming a doctor, moving to Sacramento for medical school but returning home often to visit. Elizabeth, the youngest, proved to have her mother's strength of will and her father's kind heart, and she stayed on the ranch to help manage the household and care for her aging parents. Charlie passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, and they buried him on a hillside overlooking the valley he had loved. Pete followed 5 years later, and the ranch felt emptier without their presence. But new hands came to replace them, younger men who looked to Xander and Zelda for guidance and leadership, and the cycle of life continued. Grandchildren arrived in time, filling the ranch with new laughter and energy. Zelda delighted in her role as grandmother, spoiling the little ones in ways she had been too practical to do with her own children. Xander built a special swing under the big oak tree near the cabin, and countless summer afternoons were spent pushing giggling grandchildren higher and higher toward the sky. As they grew old together, their bodies slowing and their hair turning silver, Xander and Zelda often found themselves marveling at the life they had built from such desperate beginnings. The ranch that had been Xander's dream became their shared legacy, passed down through generations of Thornes who would work this land and love it the way they had. On a warm spring evening in 1918, 40 years after that fateful auction in Riverside, Zelda and Xander sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. They were both in their 60s now, weathered by time but still strong, still devoted to each other with the same intensity that had brought them together all those years ago. "I love you," Zelda said softly, her hand finding Xander's in the gathering twilight. "I have loved you for 40 years, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Xander replied, bringing her hand to his lips. "You are my heart, Zelda, my home, my everything. Buying you that day was the best decision I ever made, but I think we both know I got far more than I paid for. I got the world, and I got it in the shape of you." They sat together in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, surrounded by the sounds of the ranch they had built and the family they had created. Inside the expanded cabin, their children and grandchildren gathered for a family dinner, their voices carrying out through the open windows in a symphony of love and belonging. This was what freedom looked like, Zelda thought, not just the legal papers Xander had given her all those years ago, though those had been important. True freedom was this: the ability to choose your own path, to build your own life, to love and be loved in return. Freedom was this ranch, this family, this man beside her who had seen her not as property, but as a person worthy of respect and care. She had been sold to the highest bidder, and the cowboy who bought her had given her the greatest gift imaginable, the choice to determine her own destiny. And she had chosen love. She had chosen family. She had chosen this beautiful, difficult, rewarding life with Xander Thorne, and she had never once regretted that choice. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars winked into existence overhead, Zelda leaned her head on Xander's shoulder and closed her eyes, perfectly content. The journey from that terrible day in Riverside to this moment on the porch had been long and sometimes painful, but every step had been worth it to arrive at this place of peace and love and belonging. They had survived. They had thrived. They had loved each other through 4 decades of marriage, and they would continue loving each other until the very end. And when that end came, as it inevitably must for all mortal creatures, they would face it together the way they had faced everything else. Hand in hand, heart to heart, 2 souls bound together by a love that had conquered every obstacle and emerged stronger on the other side. Inside the cabin, someone began to play the old fiddle that had provided music at their wedding so many years ago, and the sound of dancing feet shook the floorboards. Xander stood and offered his hand to Zelda with a slight bow, his eyes twinkling with mischief and affection. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Thorne?" Zelda placed her hand in his and let him pull her to her feet, her own eyes shining with joy. "Always and forever, Mr. Thorne, always and forever." They danced together on the porch under the stars, moving slowly to the music that drifted out from the cabin, and if their steps were less certain than they had been 40 years ago, their hearts were just as full. This was their life, their legacy, their love story. It had begun with darkness and desperation, but it had transformed into something beautiful and lasting, proof that even from the worst circumstances could come the greatest blessings. The music played on and they danced, and the ranch spread out around them in the darkness, alive with the dreams they had built and the family they had nurtured. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, as every tomorrow did, but tonight was for celebrating what they had accomplished together and for remembering the journey that had brought them here. From chains to freedom, from desperation to hope, from strangers to soulmates, Xander and Zelda Thorne had traveled a remarkable road together, and though the destination had often been uncertain, the journey itself had been worth every trial and triumph because they had made it together, bound by a love that had proven stronger than fear, deeper than pain, and more enduring than time itself. This was their happy ending, and it was also their happy beginning because every day they chose to love each other was a new start, a new chance to build something beautiful from the raw materials of devotion and commitment and genuine partnership. They had been given a second chance at life and love, and they had seized it with both hands, refusing to let go no matter what obstacles arose. As the night deepened and the music finally faded, they returned to their rocking chairs on the porch, sitting close together with Xander's arm around Zelda's shoulders and her head resting against his chest. Their children and grandchildren emerged from the cabin, calling goodnight and heading to their various homes around the ranch, and soon only the sounds of crickets and wind through the trees remained. "Thank you," Zelda whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Xander asked. "For seeing me, for choosing me, for giving me this life." "Thank you for letting me," Xander replied softly. "Thank you for trusting me when you had every reason not to. Thank you for building this dream with me. Thank you for being exactly who you are. They sat together in the peaceful darkness, two hearts beating in synchrony, two souls intertwined beyond separation. Whatever tomorrow brought, whatever challenges or joys awaited them in the years still to come, they would face it all together as they always had. And that, they both knew, was the greatest gift of all, not just love, but partnership. Not just passion, but genuine friendship. Not just romance, but respect and equality, and the deep abiding certainty that they had found in each other the missing piece that made them whole. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, marking the passage of time that cared nothing for human joy or sorrow. But down on earth, on a ranch in a valley in California, two people who had found each other against all odds continued to love each other with a devotion that would outlast even the stars themselves. And in that love, in that choice to build rather than destroy, to trust rather than fear, to hope rather than despair, lay the ultimate victory over all the darkness and cruelty the world could offer. They had survived, they had loved, they had won. And their legacy would live on in the children and grandchildren who would inherit not just the ranch, but the example of what true love looked like when it was built on a foundation of freedom, choice, and mutual devotion. This was the story they would tell for generations to come. The tale of how a cowboy saved a woman from the auction block and how that woman saved the cowboy right back, and how together they created something beautiful and lasting that would endure long after they were gone. As sleep finally claimed them both, sitting there on the porch under the watchful stars, they slept with smiles on their weathered faces and hands still clasped together, even in dreams refusing to let go of the love that had defined their lives and made all the pain worthwhile. Tomorrow they would wake to another day of work and family and the simple pleasures of life well lived. But tonight they rested in the certain knowledge that whatever came next, they would face it together, now and always, until the very end and beyond.